Welcome everyone to the Shitlord Preachers Podcast. This is episode 25. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today or watching this for the first time, this is the Shitlord Preachers Podcast. My name is Amos Joseph. I'm joined by my friend Brook Potter. We both used to be preachers a few years ago, and recently with the election and everything in 2016, we had decided that we had a lot of these political discussions, and as we sort of moved away from our religious backgrounds, we moved more into a political sphere to have these discussions. So we are the Shitlord Preachers. Just to let you guys know, I'm here in Minnesota, and I'm joined by my friend Brook Potter, who is in the UK. Brook, introduce yourself.
Good to hear you, Amos. Yes, as my friend Amos just said, my name is Brook Potter. Originally from the Twin Island nation of Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. I moved out here late 2016 to London in the UK to make a life for myself. And like my friend quite rightly said, we used to have some very interesting discussions. Amos will confess that once he was kind of a communist.
Hey.
But through reason and discussion and debate and stuff like that, we both really squared in on the libertarian principles of freedom and expression and these types of things. And we saw a lot of the same kind of mental gymnastics that you tend to see within the realms of church and cults and, these types of gatherings in the realms of politics. And we felt, well, because we've had experience in that, we could kind of address a lot of that same stuff here. So, it's good to be here. Number 25. Wow. Quarter of a century. We're really getting up there.
Yeah, we've been doing this 25 years, man. Didn't you know? So
like one a year.
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking about this. We're talking about how we've come to, really, I guess, dive into the libertarian. I guess it's true. You say ideology, and it tends to come across as like, what? You're thinking ideological. You start thinking like communists or whatever. Just hardcore people, but it is an ideology of sorts. And it's a tricky thing because I didn't pick up on this when you first kind of talked to me through a lot of these things, and I really thought, okay, freedom, liberty, even just leaning towards some aspects of being more of a minarchist sometimes, and ANCAP in some ways too, I never really knew, I guess, kind of what are some of the issues. It's good ideas. It's a good ideal sort of way of doing government, doing life in general, how society is organized. And I guess I didn't really. It sounded kind of weird when I heard this phrase, the libertarian to alt-right pipeline. Basically, what we're going to be talking about today. I guess, what is your experience with that phrase or that statement, just that thing?
This is an interesting premise. Now, it's based. Who else did something? I think Jeffrey. Who's the anarchist writer? I can't remember his name. Very dapper-looking gentleman. I think it's Jeffrey A. Tucker. Might be.
Yeah, Jeffrey Tucker. Yep.
Yeah, Jeffrey Tucker. Right. He actually wrote a book kind of trying to dispel a lot of this, talking about like basically the fascism that he supposes to be on the right. And just for the record, fascism is not on the right, it's on the left. But anyway, but it was kind of around the rise of, I think it was the Unite the Right rally in Charleston in the US.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of attention was given to Richard Spencer and stuff like that. And this whole idea of libertarianism being a pipeline to the alt-right. And when I say alt-right, I mean it in the present vernacular of September 2018, which is a ethno-nationalist identity that's kind of bordering on fascism a little bit, about using the state to enforce, these types of standards and stuff like that. I mean, that
white nationalist ideas.
Right. I mean, ironically, it doesn't necessarily have to be white, although that tends to be the misrepresentation. Yeah,
There are black nationalists,
there are black nationalists and other types, Jewish nationalists and stuff like that.
Hapa nationalists.
They're Hapa nationalists, as our friends Nico and Shane with the ethnos. Yeah, but I mean, you guys are doing it in jest before anybody decides to freak out. But no, so Jeffrey raised some interesting point. Now he wrote a book about this. I haven't read it, and at first I thought it was kind of absurd. This idea that liberty-minded individuals who they're trying to improve freedoms in a society could find anything in common with some of the more fringe elements of the alt-right. But over the couple months that I've been kind of observing this thing, I've actually started to kind of get it. And I wouldn't say it's a direct pipeline. I think a lot of it has to do with people are being affected by the policies of somewhat, especially out here in Europe and stuff, of mass immigration, of the clampdown on freedoms, the erosion of civil liberties, and these different kinds of things. And they want to do something. They're seeing their communities change. They're seeing, as I say, I'm out here in the UK, in London, and sometimes I ride the bus and nobody speaks English, which is kind of strange, right? But
right.
Yeah, but it's a reality. I mean, not that I mind. I think it's pretty awesome because I'm never going to meet Turks and Italians and stuff like that back in my home country. But for people who've grown up here and stuff like that, the place is definitely taken on a different feel, and that's what everybody tells me. And some people, they didn't ask for that. They didn't vote for that. That was not something that they signed on for. And they would like to actually be participants in trying to preserve, their way of life and what they're accustomed to.
Right.
And unfortunately, the keyboard warriors of the libertarians isn't going to cut it. And when you have those types of feelings, unfortunately or fortunately, people like the Richard Spencers and the alt-right who are, they're gathering in rallies, they've got an action plan. At least they're doing something. And I could understand why people who are feeling that disconnect would want to connect with a group that's actually doing something.
Right. Yeah, it's because so I guess I'll explain quickly kind of why I felt we should talk about this. We've definitely touched on, some ideas of the alt-right, kind of pointing out like, where we might agree, or at least the information, the statistics, the studies they read tend to make sense, but where we would disagree, like basically, some of their ideas on sort of this, tribalism and just how we deal with people in society. I tend to agree. Yeah, people just have this tribalism built into us. It's really difficult, with to kind of reconcile our innate behaviors to basically see and react to difference, whether that be physical. I mean, just the tribalism could be a physical thing. I see someone who is of a different ethnicity. I see that. I just notice it. And there might be certain triggers that come from that. But also even that sort of translates over into having different ideologies, leftists and right-wingers, authoritarians and libertarians, anarchists and full-blown statist communists. They all tend to, people try to, we have a desire to be tribal, to have groups that we're sort of in with, whether that be through race, through gender, through ideology, or just the list goes on. And what Brook had basically, he sent me this video of a couple of guys that I've been kind of watching here and there. Just usually if something pops up, I'll watch a video. They're called the Asian Capitalists. And from what I see, they're these, they're full Asian, so they're a lot better than me. A couple of Asian guys that are, it's in English, just if anyone's wondering. They have these videos that they really talk about sort of libertarian ideas, sort of stuff in the news, kind of like what we do, Brooke.
But they do it more. We're not exactly Asian.
Exactly. But they do more of a shorter form instead of this long form that we do. But they do maybe like 10, 15, 20-minute videos really addressing certain things. And they talk, I think, I'd say they're kind of libertarian in some sense. I mean,
Oh yeah.
they have probably a better grasp on like what specific type of libertarian they are.
I mean,
Um,
they definitely fall into the philosophical. They're both Canadian, from what I
but they
understand.
are. Oh,
They are
okay.
Canadian, but I think one of them has like ties to Hong Kong, and they recently did a trip out there to get his like residency, his allowance to stay in
Right,
Hong Kong.
right.
But they both dream to live in a place like Switzerland, which is probably the only country in the world that has a form of government where the politicians are actually afraid of the people because they actually
Right.
have tremendous power, you know. Um,
Right, right. But
yeah,
yeah, they had done a video. I thought it was a recent one, but Brook just sent it to me and I watched the whole thing. It was about the alt-right, so basically the libertarian to alt-right pipeline. I'm just going to pull it up here quick. Just if anyone wants to go check it out. So yeah, Asian capitalists down here. Basically, they did this. Why is there a libertarian to alt-right pipeline? Now it's from 2017, so this is not some like new thing that we're just talking about and it's never happened before or whatever. But we'll definitely link it to below. And if anything, I mean, in the future, I definitely would like to reach out to them, see if they want to come on the stream and talk about stuff. But
that'd be pretty
um,
cool.
they basically address the issue of why is there some sort of I guess subtle subverted sort of connection between the alt-right and libertarians. And I get they go through kind of what some of the ideals of libertarianism, how you have your different kinds of sort of the more pragmatic versus the more ideal libertarians. You have your, I mean, when I say pragmatic and ideal, I would say you have your ideal libertarians that are more about open border, free movement of people, sort of like believing in this sort of utopia, sort of super capitalism of the future where everyone is in the marketplace kind of thing. Whereas you have the more pragmatic libertarians that see that that'd be nice, but we still need like borders. Like there's definitely culture differences. There's just a lot of things that kind of hinder this utopia. So that it's better to probably have smaller or closed off sort of systems of markets to operate within countries, within communities that can work, but probably not on the level of like the ideal ones, where it's sort of like where we have sort of capitalist Earth that we would
And I mean,
sort of
to be
like
fair,
the
you've gone through both stages. I'm assuming.
yeah. I mean, I kind of came around to like just in the initial, so if you want to say transition into libertarianism, I kind of thought I was just thinking, freedom, kind of looking at absolute just freedom in general, and which is why I kind of go between like being minarchist or ANCAP, because ANCAPs are kind of the ideal ones where they think just no borders. They believe in sort of just absolute private property. Oh, the
Yeah,
borders would be your property. So if you own a mall and let's say certain kinds of people will say don't work so well coming to your mall, cause a ruckus, or you don't have those people come to your mall because it's your mall.
right.
And so, I mean, and so some people have issues with that because that's just kind of gives people the right to be discriminatory. And then you have the more pragmatic ones that say, well, yes, private property, but still like the minarchist view would basically still include like a border. Okay, like we're America, we still have like skeleton government, but we have borders. So we would still want to keep a check on who unfortunately illegally comes into our country, you
Sure.
know. So yeah, and yeah, like you said, I've sort of gone between the two and can see a lot of issues, mainly with, I mean, the ideal is the ideal, but the practical has to real is taking into consideration where we're at now. If you could
Correct.
start from scratch somehow, human civilization started from scratch, and we were all sort of one tribe, yeah, you could like really start from like, okay, a marketplace. But we've become tribal. We've sort of built systems around being tribal. We've had governments. We've had borders. we've started to evolve to be different than each other. I mean, you can't tell me that, I mean, yes, an Asian and a white person and a black person and a Mexican person and an African person, they're technically all human, but we've evolved huge differences culturally, physically, even depending upon what you believe in, even mentally in some cases. We just behave very differently.
Sure.
So, these guys basically go over that in the video. I mean, not like in the detail I've went into, but they start to address sort of like, well, here's libertarians, here's the different kinds of libertarians, and they start to address what are some of the issues with libertarianism. Like what I mean, not every ideology is the same. It's just perfect. There's no perfect ideology. I think just to make a quick little reference, our friends Shane and Nico just had a guy, this guy Renegade of Funk. He's in Japan, and he was talking to them about democracy, and he said, if what was it? He was quoting someone. He said it was Winston Churchill. I don't know if it's true, but basically he said Winston Churchill said, if you want to find out the failures of democracy, talk to your average voter for 5 minutes.
Right.
And so there's definitely issues with even the best systems we have. Now, democracy is the best we have, but it still has a lot of issues. Just like with libertarianism, I think I consider it the best since I identify with it. It still has some issues. So I don't know if, Brooke, you want to add any thoughts before we get into the real issues of it.
I'm trying to remember the quote. I'm not exactly sure if it was Churchill or somebody else that said, democracy is the worst form of government except for everything else.
Yeah, this guy he was, when he was referencing that, he said, I don't know if Churchill also said this, but
yeah. So I mean, I understand it. Like I've recently been kind of going over the classics and stuff like that. So I'm reading Plato's Republic, and some of the Homer and Iliad and stuff like that. Some of the real classics and stuff. So these are not new ideas. I mean, democracy is a very old idea, and I don't know if I was telling you this or I was somebody else I was speaking to. Plato basically said that the democracy was a bad idea because the intelligentsia, or the people who actually know what might work, are not necessarily the ones ruling in positions of power. And I think he gave the example of a confectionery shopkeeper and a doctor, and they're up for debates. These are the candidates, and he basically said, well, the confectionery shop owner, this is the person who sells sweets and chocolates and stuff like that, could point to the doctor and say, why would you vote for this guy? He pokes you and prods you and hurts you with all of these new contraptions and stuff like that. He can never give you the sweet delicacies like I can. Now, his response to that, like, how can the doctor reasonably respond and say, yes, I'm hurting you, but for your own good? He can't. There's no political wayward in that regard to like really win that argument, which means that the people who end up in politics are not necessarily the best. And I thought that was a very poignant point. Like just briefly, I also went from I believed in open borders as long as you didn't have a welfare state. I said as long as you have people coming there voluntarily and there's no kind of subsidies or welfare or whatever the case might be. Excuse me. I thought it was fine. But then Venezuela's economy went down the toilet. And Venezuelans started showing up in Trinidad and Tobago by the boatloads. Now, I have nothing against Venezuelans. If I was in their situation, I would be fleeing the country too. My mother is Venezuelan. But you could see the change in the culture. Suddenly, there's a lot of Latin music playing in the clubs. And some clubs are exclusively Latin, right? So like this kind of thing. Now, again, I have no problem with that, but I do see how it's beyond the economic. I believe it's mass migration into a population goes beyond just the economic benefits that may come from immigration.
Right.
There is a cultural aspect to it, and especially like as in the United States, where there is a culture of freedom. If you start importing people who do not share those values, as I say, you have a very large Latin American population that's some of it's illegal, some of it legal in the U.S., and they're voting for the same policies that destroyed their country in the U.S. Right?
Right.
That's so again. This is why it is very important to vet. And I mean, Plato was very well. I can't say extreme, but he believed there was an ethnic component to it. It's like you have to keep it kind of homogenous for there to be stability within a nation and stuff like that. Very much in line with Richard Spencer and all these ethno-nationalists.
Dang, Plato was a racist.
Yeah, I mean, thousands of years ago, Greek. Yeah, surprise, surprise. But yeah, he did make that point. Now, I don't necessarily agree it's the ethnic. I definitely think the culture has a huge part to play. I mean, a very good example is that out here in the UK, in Britain,
Right.
We had the empire. A large portion of East Indians, Sikhs, came to the UK, but they embraced the British culture, right? So much so that, I mean, to this day, there's Indian and Pakistani cricket teams that they learned all that from us. Out here in the UK, the guys, they may have their turbans on, but they love Wimbledon. They love the Queen. I mean, just like you can't get anybody who's more British. So it's not the ethnicity. It is the assimilation into the culture.
Right.
And let's just be honest. There are some people who are not seeking to assimilate, which is especially a bigger problem when you have mass migration, like what I saw in Trinidad. There are communities that are now coming up that don't even speak English.
Mm-hmm.
They're speaking Spanish. The music is changing. The food is changing. It's just there's been a cultural shift within the country. And Trinidad, as it was, is never going to be the same. I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. I'm just saying it does change the culture on the ground. And that's why I think you do need the borders.
Right. I mean, that's kind of the issue with sort of the immigration argument here in the States. So you were talking about Pakistanis and these Indians, like they come here and they become doctors.
Yeah,
It's, and they're good doctors. I've had family members tell me, "Oh, my grandfather, he had a hip replacement. My father had his condition, and they just every time there was always at least one Indian doctor somewhere in the process.
sure.
They did their job just as well, and in some cases better than their white counterparts. And say what you want to say about the the let's just say the illegal immigration we have with Mexico and everything. A lot of people will admit, though, that Hispanics, Mexicans that come to this country tend to work pretty hard. So
For sure.
there's that economic component you see with the Indians. They a lot of them tend to maintain their own culture, but contribute very well to the economy.
Yeah.
Um,
And to the society as a whole.
right, and Latin music or even um, Indian restaurants, they do just fine in the States. Um, the only times, and here I am in Minnesota trying to relate to, we'll just say, Arabic, North African, Middle Eastern sort of immigration to the States. We don't really have that much, but where I have seen it, and where you have seen it, you can see there's a difference in sort of how they assimilate. If I
Yeah.
if I walk into sort of a Hispanic home or even an Indian home, like you see their culture is there, but you kind of see just the way they are, and the way they talk. I mean, uh, I've known some Hispanic families, and it was always kind of difficult to set up a meeting with them or something because they're all busy, they're working.
Yeah.
With Indian families, they have a lot more structure. And this is just cultural things. I want
Correct.
everyone to realize before we really go into it that we're not trying to make any sort of racist things. It's just these are cultural things we notice, and these are things that do really well in essentially America. The Western country of the world. We're kind of the center of the Western world, and where you see the more Middle Eastern Arabic, you don't see it as much, we'll just say. And Brooke, you can vouch for this, that there's definitely problems with that in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, there's problems with it even in the US, right? I mean, last time I was in Miami and I went to a store, none of them spoke English, right? I mean, Miami has gone like it's full Hispanic, right? I mean, there's little Cuba and little Cuba's grown. But I mean, even with that, it's not necessarily even a nationality thing. Like a lot of there's a huge exodus that's taking place right now in the state of California. And so all of these progressive liberals out in California and stuff like that, they're moving to different parts of the country, because there's just an economic disaster put on because of the state and taxation and other things. And over the last 10 to 5 years, a huge number of them have settled in Austin, Texas. And it changed the voting patterns of the
Oh
people of
yeah,
Austin.
Austin has just become sort of like a
San Francisco
whatever
light.
cesspool.
Yeah, it's become a liberal. They imported the same destructive policies that basically bankrupted the state of California. They're doing it now in Austin, right? And again, it's not race. I mean, these are Americans and stuff like that. I'm not saying they're any particular demographic, but it's the clash of cultures. But this is you have to be real about those things, and that's why, at least for me, I definitely see the need for educating the populace on the issues for voting and stuff like that, but as well as controlling your immigration. So I think I gave you the example that if half of the population of China were to move into the US wouldn't be the US anymore, right? They would start voting and suddenly you'll have a one-party system, right?
I mean, what did Lauren Southern do? She was going on the streets talking to a lot of the sort of Middle Eastern immigrants that were in the UK and was asking, what does it mean to be British?
Yeah,
And they were saying to be British is to be multicultural.
yeah,
And, then they were starting to identify certain things and, well, why are you British? Well, I have a British passport.
yeah.
And then she said, well, what if
Would you be
what if
Chinese?
what if you went to China and you had a Chinese passport? Are you then Chinese? Well, no.
Yeah.
So
Interesting catch 22.
exactly. So I really want to get into kind of why this argument these guys were presenting, talking about sort of why why are some libertarians moving over? And just before I get into that, just real quick, so I brought this up to I'll just say to some other libertarians. Um, and as I brought it up to them, which is why I think this is such an issue that we really need to discuss as libertarians, is um, the libertarian movement is just libertarianism as a whole. I'm not talking about the party. I'm talking about, because there are libertarians who do not like identifying with the LP, the party. Um, they tend to think that's such a mess. It's just another way to play party politics within a movement that's meant to be just a movement. Now, the party, regardless of what you think of the party, yes, it's still important to have. You want to try to get these political ideas into government, but moving from that, basically, once I posted this video into to kind of show them like, hey, I've just found this. This is interesting. I just posted it, no comments, no captions. I just had them watch it, and immediately I kind of got some responses saying, there's no such thing. Libertarians don't turn alt-right. We're not alt-right. No, there's no pipeline. This doesn't happen. And so I started asking some questions, basically saying, why do you think that? Did you watch the whole video? That tends to be the thing. Did you watch the whole video? Are you actually looking into what their arguments? Do you agree? Like, can you see why this makes sense? Some of the connections, they didn't think that there was any connection. I said, have you heard of Richard Spencer before he was the alt-right poster child? And they were kind of like, no. So if you guys go look up Richard Spencer, Ron Paul, you'll find an old C-SPAN picture from like 2007, I think. And it's Richard Spencer giving like an opening address for like some conservative conference. and Ron Paul is standing right next to him. Now, Ron
Wow.
Paul is kind of like one of the first, big sort of libertarians that were in the mainstream that we heard about. He had to go under the Republican banner, but he was kind of one of the main people. He was, a lot of people consider him to be a bigger sort of figure within libertarianism than even Gary Johnson had. Gary Johnson was kind of just the guy running for president that had, a chance that actually now, as a matter of now the rules are changed that he's setting precedents when he ran in 2016. Now we have to be on all 50 states ballot for the election, just as a matter of because of how much attention he got, how many votes he actually got. The Libertarian presidential candidate for 2020 will be on the ballot regardless.
Excellent.
He kind of had to work to that for the 2016 election. So,
and in the debate, right? Wasn't there something with the debate as well?
I think they're still trying to push for trying to change the rules of the debate, trying to include, a third or possibly even a fourth person.
Right.
We had done that before, but it just, it's we haven't gotten back to that. So, as much as Gary Johnson did a lot of stuff, and regardless of what you think about him and his Aleppo comment or whatever, Ron Paul was kind of one of the first ones, and people still, like I said, people think that he tends to be a better figure than Gary Johnson ever was. So you see Ron Paul with Richard Spencer, and as soon as I posted that, immediately these guys I was talking to were like, no, Ron Paul's not outright. I said, no, I didn't say he was all right. We know him as sort of like the libertarian we all like. That's in, he pretty much left on his farewell address to Congress. He pretty much was saying, you're all a bunch of crooks. I'm out of here. He called out Congress because he called out the authoritarian issues. So I pointed this out and I said, no, I'm not saying Ron Paul's all right. And they said, well, obviously Richard Spencer's not a libertarian. I said, but if he's standing next to this guy and he's, obviously agreeing with him on some things, this is what I'm talking about. And then Richard Spencer just pops up out of nowhere just prior to the 2016 election, starting to talk about all these different things. Some people were even saying, someone said, oh, I think I heard a quote of him saying he was a socialist. He even agrees with, universal basic income and all this stuff. And I pointed this out, and I've talked to people even, you see sort of the transition, like you see people like, and I'm not calling these people alt-right by any means, but you see people like Lauren Southern, you see people like Stefan Molyneux, you even see people like Molly Yiannopoulos. They all started off with very libertarian, sort of anti-SJW kind of side of libertarianism. They were kind of talking about these things, talking about freedom of speech, less government and stuff. Now, they're not alt-right by any means, but they tend to address they've addressed these issues with libertarianism, especially with Lauren Southern. She did a whole video on her issue with libertarianism. She likes these ideas, but then she's pointing out the video from C-SPAN, the guy in the thong dancing half naked on the stage, and all that
At the convention.
At the convention, exactly. So kind of pointing all that out, which is fair criticism. I'll give her that, which is kind of what we're getting into here. But she's basically pointing out like a lot of these issues, yeah, libertarianism is a great idea in principle, but what do you have to show for it?
Right.
That's kind of the main argument of that these guys in the Asian capitalists, what they pointed out. What do libertarians have to show for it? So, and because libertarianism didn't just come out of nowhere. It's been a party since the 70s, and it's obviously had its roots going even further back, at least in the more liberal ideals, and
classical liberal ideas.
Right, classical liberal ideas. You're starting to see people like Dave Rubin, who he likes throwing around as I'm a classical liberal, but then he goes on Joe Rogan and starts talking about how he agrees with ANCAPs. Um, you can see there's that connection there. But we have there's all these ideals. I mean, Brook, you'd agree that we're libertarians, and we definitely have some things that are more ideal, not necessarily the most pragmatic.
Agreed.
See, a lot of libertarians don't admit that. As I could see from this conversation we were having with these other guys that I talked to, there was definitely it was kind of a dismissive, arrogant attitude, and it's nothing against the the people that I talk to can probably watch the stream, but they know who they are, and it's no criticism on them. I had kind of the same idea too. Like,
right,
it's very easy to think that your ideology, your ideals are sort of the best, and they're just infallible. Like, if you get this, if you're just red pilled to the, you're woke, you're just gonna get it. You're not gonna be faltered by any other ideal, and that's just not true. And I mean, there were some comments made about how it's easy. You can be very easily, oh, you're just weak-minded if you're just going to be swayed to the alt-right as a libertarian. No, there's a reason the alt-right. I mean, yeah, the news is blowing it to think like there's literally millions of alt-righters in this country, but at the same time, it's definitely an ideology that we're hearing about, that we see people talk about. I mean, I've met plenty of alt-righters, and I mean, for the most part, they're fairly reasonable people.
You've met alt-righters?
Yeah.
Nazi?
Yeah. I've met with them. We sacrificed some, and I'm just kidding. No, it's and these guys, these Asian capitalists, they address this too. Like, you see, as a libertarian, you're going through your ideals. You start becoming frustrated. Like, well, no one's in government. The rules, it's just more authoritarianism across the world with different governments, even in the U.S. As much as people, you have libertarians that are like, Trump's a libertarian. You have libertarians that are like, Trump's going to be the next authoritarian Hitler. And when in reality, it's just more of the same.
It's politics as usual.
Yeah, it's business as usual, really, with anyone. I mean, as crazy as he is, he's just another politician that's unfortunately has his own interests that are lining up with more political interests rather than more practical sort of freedom, liberty-driven, agendas. And I don't know. I mean, you see, like, these guys, they were making a lot of sense to say that, what do we really have to show for it? We have our ideals, and here we are feeling like we're just so edgy, and we're just outcasts. That's another thing they talked about. Like, people who sort of identify with libertarianism, like, they've become outcasts. They're kind of like this odd one out. We're the sort of the fringe. We're believing in pretty much a smaller state, when both Republican and Democrats tend to believe in a big state in different areas, or just like small state across the board.
Yeah.
It's like when a liberal or when a leftist kind of comes at me and says, yay, we got like more gay rights or more something rights, some civil rights that like happen. I said, great. And then they'll get on me because I also agree with the Republican guy that's like, yay, tax cuts,
Yeah, exactly.
But when it comes down to it, as much as I'd like to see, lower taxes, fewer social programs, more freedom for people to just be themselves, move across countries, do their own thing, which is all great. There is a part of me that will agree that there could be more harm than done in the short term.
Right.
If we just unleashed, let's say, economic freedom to, I don't know, to a small enough degree that the world would notice. Like, let's say if we just loosened all regulations in certain industries, just to like allow small businesses to do their job. You might see some problems. And libertarians don't really address that. I'm saying libertarians as a whole. And
Sure.
To go off and say you're just minded if you're going to be swayed by these other authoritarian ideas of some more alt-right ideals, which is not always authoritarian. You have your authoritarian alt-righters, and you have your more like, hey, let's just go on our own, form our own community, voluntarily segregate ourselves to form, the ethno-state. The ethno-state kind of gets a lot of the idea gets to be portrayed as a sort of just purely authoritarian, sort of forced segregation, like kill all the non-whites kind of thing going on, which is true for some, but not for all. I've definitely talked to some alt-righters. I've never met an alt-righter that's really like gone on the more authoritarian, but I've talked to alt-righters that are mostly like, like there would be some sort of, there could be something where they vote on sort of like a split between, I mean, there's a whole discussion you guys can find on YouTube where I was with our friends at Sarcasm and Liberty. We talked to this guy called Alt-Right Ohio, and he talked about the sort of a plan to split up the U.S. into 3 countries, sort of the white, the black, and the
Hispanic.
Right. And how you would go about military, how to redistribute military assets, which was a little that part was a little weird. But I mean, just overall, the plan seemed to be very voluntary, very like a transition. It wasn't like unleash all the armed forces to split up the country and build up walls. It was more so let's over the next. I think it was like. I would say a decade, but he was saying like over the next few years, you split people up, people will start occupying certain parts of the country. There can be movement between the nations, but you can't be like a citizen in another one or something.
Right.
Seemed to be mostly voluntary in some cases, but not that I advocate for this. It's like I always got to clarify myself, Brook. I'm like talking about these ideas. Like I'm not advocating for any of this.
You're just hearing the ideas,
Right. Which makes me a racist.
Well, it's the whole guilt by association culture that we're in, which is why the likes of Sargon, Dankula, Lawrence Southern, and others, even Steven Crowder, who, those guys have gone up on the front lines to try and debate and debunk to the best of their abilities a lot of these ideas. Some more successful than others, I'll just be honest. But because they've actually, just because they've associated with these people, of course, they're all now labeled alt-right.
Right.
And again, this adds into the pressures, right? So, I mean, the cartoon is quite ingenious in the sense, you've got a body of people who believe in freedom and liberty and stuff like that. And then you got other groups that are using that same freedom and liberty to oppress the freedom lovers, right?
Yeah.
Through identity politics, right? So, once upon a time, the most liberal thing that you could think in terms of race relations was race doesn't matter. It's the content of your character, right? The words of Martin Luther King, Jr. Now, that's been thrown out the window because of social justice, and now you need to acknowledge race for positive affirmative action.
Exactly.
Right, so it's no longer equality under the law; they want special privilege. So
colorblindness is racism.
Yeah, colorblindness is racism, right? Because you're not acknowledging past injustices from slavery over 100 years ago or some nonsense, right? And so, the blacks have their oppression points, the Hispanics, the gays, women, and stuff like that. And yes, a lot of heterosexual white males, they get no points. They get no respect, as Rodney Dangerfield used to say.
Hey, no respect.
No respect with this kind of bug eyes, So, who's the only one technically fighting for their identity? It's the alt-right. That again plays into it. So I mean, again, it's not as easy to say, okay, if you're a libertarian, you automatically fall into the alt-right category. No, the culture that we've built ourselves into with the oppression Olympics and social justice and all this other brain syphilis of the left, the non-aggression principle is a very pivotal part of libertarianism, right? You do not initiate force against other people, but you are allowed to defend yourself. And when culturally and socially and in universities and other things, you are being oppressed by this social justice movement, the only ones who are going to fight back is not going to be the libertarians, right? Because they don't believe in that kind of persuasion of force and getting the state involved and
Yeah,
doing all these other kinds of things. You fall to the alt-right.
yeah. I mean, one of the things these guys in the video talked about was, I mean, it's just life in general. They're just like, you know, they're like, and they're like in my apartment building, they're like, I despise my neighbors. They're talking about
Right.
how like there are people shooting up drugs, and they're like, I don't like this community.
Yeah.
And so you have libertarians in this country who are, they're thinking about the non-aggression principle. They're thinking about all these things, and they're like, okay, well, no one's obvious, cops aren't coming after me. I'm a good citizen. I'm doing my own thing. But man, like I'm a white man. And
Yeah.
that's apparently a bad thing in society. So I'm getting crap at work. I'm getting crap from, I live in a neighborhood where I'm getting crap from neighbors. I'm getting all this stuff.
From the
Like, and
media.
yeah, I mean, the media doesn't like me. I'm just sitting here. I just want some freedom, like, and I mean, the gears are turning. They're looking,
Yeah.
they're looking at stuff. They hear about this alt-right thing, and it's not weak-mindedness. I want that to be clear for the people that I kind of talk to. Is it's not being weak-minded. It's just conclusions that can be drawn from real life. This is sort of the issue with the clash between the pragmatic and the ideal libertarians. You have your more pragmatic libertarians that are looking pragmatic issues, and they're thinking, okay, well, you know, um, they're feeling aggression towards them through society,
Yeah.
and as a response, they start to think, well, what if I start to like, what if I had a community of just people like me?
Yeah.
And and then I mean, and people that tend to look like you, think like you,
Yeah.
and would be more neighborly towards you, would not judge you in a way that you feel is unjust to you. And you start to think, well, the alt right is like that.
Or at least the alt-right offers that.
Offers that. I should, yeah, good
Yeah.
clarification there. They
Yeah.
offer some of those things,
Yeah.
and so they start to look into that and become convinced of some of these things, because libertarians tend to address human nature, and you look
Yeah.
at tribalism, you look at sort of how we associate with each other. Those are human nature too. Now, the concern with the alt right is more of what are the implications? What does that tend to imply? Now you have your alt righters that are just maybe more voluntary communities of a certain race, and then you have your more extreme ones that are like full blown authoritarian ethno state kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's what happens. You, as a movement, libertarianism doesn't address. They're so focused on the individual side, which is good.
Yeah.
They forget community. They sort of believe like community. I mean, community is supposed to be sort of in the ideal libertarian world. Community is supposed to naturally evolve out
Right.
of freedom to associate with each other.
Correct.
But they're so focused on the individual that they forget that there are people in the group that feel essentially a group identity politics. They're starting to get drawn into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think a bit of it has to do with the fact. Well, yes, libertarianism is about the individual, and this is again the incompatibility a lot of people feel with the state, because the state really is more focused on the communal, right?
Mhm.
The state only gets involved with people when you start to interact with somebody else, right? If you're by
Right.
yourself, you could think what you want, you could say what you want, you could pretty much do
Right.
what you want, right? But the minute you start dealing with other people, now you enter the realm of state, right? And this is what libertarianism hasn't. I mean, obviously, I can't say it hasn't, but generally speaking, a lot of the idealists and stuff like that never transpose the rights of the individual and the individualist, sentiment to the level of the state, and what does that actually mean? Because this, yes, there is the body of power, but that's actually part of a country or a community or a town or something like that. And a lot of these things don't necessarily translate up, right?
Yeah.
And that's we don't know where that balance lies. Um, but you're right in terms of the person who's seeing the changes, and they're being attacked on all sides. Unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know. The alt right is the only one speaking for that large demographic of white heterosexual males. Because I mean, if you're gay and white and male, you got gay points.
Right. I mean, you look at I kind of look at it like just for me to using the imagery. Um, Libertarians are kind of like um, imagine sort of a forest, and trees come from seeds. So the libertarians are kind of like you're a seed. You can be whatever tree you want,
Yes.
and how you interact with nature, how you interact with the ecosystem, that comes later. And here we are trying to plant seeds everywhere, and they're not really growing too much.
Yeah.
Therefore, not doing much for the ecosystem.
Yeah. We're not
We're,
cultivating the ecosystem. Yeah.
we're not cultivating the ecosystem. We're not creating our own ecosystem. We're not actually getting involved. We're not really getting a lot of people elected or whatnot. And we're claiming that most of the trees out there are like us trees,
Mhm.
because kind of Gary Johnson was saying, I believe half the country is like at least libertarian in some degree. That they would,
Yeah.
if the message just got out there. Um, excuse me. And here, and so we're not seeing the ecosystem we want to be cultivated. It's not really going anywhere. But our ideals are still like, the seed. That's you. Like it's yeah,
All of that's true.
but the trees, like there
Yeah.
are trees over here, so you got your Democrat trees, you got your Republican trees, and but we have this like little sprouts, little whatever going on over here that's libertarians, and then you have the alt right that goes, look at our trees. Now they're kind of now their trees are kind of fabricated because they're like, look, our trees could look like this,
Right.
and
Yeah.
we're
Because
like,
they don't actually have trees,
they don't
really.
have trees, but they're like,
They're
look.
not in any
So they're
position.
saying they're showing pictures of forests. They're showing all these videos.
Memes and cartoons.
Right, right. And they're like, look, we've got this whole thing. Like, this is what our forest could look like.
Yeah.
You don't like that forest. You don't like that forest. But look what this forest could be. So
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
new forest that they're claiming can work. And maybe it could for some people voluntarily on their own.
Right.
But that's what's going on. You see libertarians that are like, well, maybe I could take my seat over there.
Yeah.
Maybe I could get a little bit something going on. Maybe it'll work. And that's not weak mindedness. That's just reality.
Yeah.
That's
It's
just what
pragmatism.
happens with people. When people feel, I mean, that's why Trump won, because it was a backlash. Alt right is sort of a backlash to a more extreme sense of the backlash towards the left wing identity politics. I mean, a lot of people. You had some YouTubers start talking about that, but it's true. It's becoming more and more accepted. Like, this is the backlash. The left wing wants to call it, sort of patriarch, man's fragility or whatever like that. But no, no, no. It's just human nature. when you sort of take the majority of one over the minority of another in certain ideals, or even, I mean, in this case, it's not even really majority minority. It's just sort of half and half. One half gets a little louder that tries to silence this one. So a couple in this little not as loud group get a little crazy, you know,
Yeah, and they push
and
back.
they push back, you know. You have a lot of reactionary movements going on. The I don't know if the left wing SJWs were kind of a reactionary thing. It seems to be less reactionary, more just sort of like a fake revolution. I don't know, but
Yeah, I would have used the word revolutionary because they're not actually fighting on anything. You have to be brainwashed into believing you're oppressed in the United States. You got to make that shit up, right?
it probably started with some genuine concerns with issues that turned into a monster that it is today.
Possibly. I mean,
I mean,
obviously I've never studied the roots of social
right.
justice,
But I mean, you
right?
kind of look
But
at like, I mean, they do address like things that are happening. They just look at it through. They just think the causes are different. So if
correct.
people are prejudicial towards each other, that's just people.
Yeah,
That's not the government. You
correct.
know,
Like the
that's
claim
it.
of systematic racism or whatever, systemic racism or whatever
Point made to
nonsense.
one law. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly, right?
So yeah.
So I mean,
So yeah,
what has the Libertarian Party accomplished in the United States? And I'll kind of touch on what's going on out here as well.
I'd say it's good to sort of bring to light a lot of the issues. Sort of like, I mean, you have your constitutional libertarians that are sort
Right,
of like trying to point back to like basically the first 100 years of this country to kind of go
right.
like we should go back to that. I mean, for example, I mean, if you've ever watched the John Adams miniseries on HBO, you see a lot of differences. There was small. I mean, the cabinet was kind of made up. There's no constitutional thing for it. So there's a
Yeah,
cabinet. It was very basic. Um, the vice president didn't have anywhere near the power he had today. Like there's just different things you kind of saw. Like for example, they elect George Washington for president, John Adams as his vice president.
vice
There was
president.
a
Yeah,
scene where you see the cabinet and Vice President Adams, and then you see Washington there. They're talking, and then Washington stands up and basically looks over at Adams and says, "Excuse me, Mr. Vice President, I'll have a meeting with the cabinet." Basically, kicks him out.
right.
And so you see, and then really, just the vice president just sat there in the in Congress waiting to vote to break a tie.
Yeah, pretty much.
So I mean, not to like go back to exactly that, but I mean, you see a lot of things. The libertarians want to go back to that sort of the what are the intentions of the founders? Go back to what it was before. You know, you hear about they address all these different things, and it's what I'm seeing is they're kind of trying to bring back a more of an appreciation, more transparency to see like why there's a real issue. You know, sort of how the U.S. is intervening in just about every country in the planet. How we have more bases, you know, outside of the country than we do in the country. How we have the largest military budget than the next like what 20 countries combined or something.
Something like that, yeah.
Um,
But not per
and
capita. Saudi Arabia actually outspends y'all per capita, but that's another story.
right. Or if you just look at, you know, how we're just in so many alliances that just don't do us any good. We're like the
That's
top,
true.
you know, top fund. Like we pay the most money into the UN. We pay the most money into like NATO. We pay the most money in just all these organizations that it's really just about us technically. But in the end, it doesn't do us any good.
Correct.
You know, you look at the UN and its Human Rights Council is full of human rights violators.
Yeah.
The UN kid doesn't really do anything, anyways. The UN has an army. What does it do?
Yeah, it has a peacekeeping force. It's not called an army, but yeah.
But I remember what was it? You ever watch the movie Hotel Rwanda?
Who's in that again? Remind me.
Don Cheadle. It was about the Rwanda
The
genocide, like a
genocide. Yeah.
million Rwandans killed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like one of the parts in the movie, you see Don Cheadle, like he comes across basically some UN peacekeepers. They can't do shit. Like
Pretty
people,
much.
basically they were like they would guard the door. Like he had his hotel where he brought in people, and they would guard the door, but they weren't allowed to shoot.
Yeah.
It was just like what the heck? Like what? Basically, it was trying to show like I mean they literally can't do anything. It's
Right.
just kind of like it's a big virtue signal, of cooperation and all this. And not that that's any bad. It's just it's become pointless. So
Yeah. It's ineffective.
basically, libertarians are bringing to this country sort of an awareness of kind of not to sound Alex Jones like, but what's really going on.
And
They'll
I
bring to
don't.
light
What about
free.
you, Amos? What are you specifically doing for libertarianism?
Absolutely nothing. No.
You are
I
what the
mean,
video is about. Okay, just checking.
uh, I guess what is my contribution to libertarianism? I mean, the stream.
Yes,
You know,
excellent.
libertarian their streams talking about different issues. Um, showing that libertarians are not just all about taxation and theft all day, but actually talking about other issues. Trying to be a little more. I consider myself the more pragmatic libertarian, as
Right.
people are probably realizing by now. Talking about issues just as a commentator, not so much like the libertarian is one way of identifying what I believe in, what I talk about, but in the end, it's just it's the principles themselves. It's not so much the label.
Yeah.
So how you apply that to different things. There's a video I saw yesterday called "Don't Make Me Defend Trump." Have you seen that?
No, no.
It was from We the Internet. Basically, they made a video where it was a guy like going through day to day life, and people would just go on about Trump, and he would like step in and be like, "Well, like he didn't actually say that," and they're like, "What are you defending Trump? What are you, a Nazi?" And he goes, "No, no, no, but if you read this," and they go, "Geez, Dave, why would you say that? Like, how could you support that guy? How?" And then they like walk out of the office. Gee, I can't believe I'm working with a Trump supporter. And he's like, I voted Hillary. And
Pretty
then
much.
but it's just like in the elevator, in the office, at home. He's just like, seriously, guys, don't make me defend him, but
Yeah.
don't misrepresent him either. Like, and
Sure.
it's kind of like that. Like when I talk about things, I'm seeing libertarians kind of fall into the left wing sort of, Trump this, Trump that, and I'm like, but these other things are okay though. Like, or really, when it comes down to it, what did you expect?
Yeah.
If it was Hillary, it'd be the same thing in
Well,
different
maybe
ways.
not. Maybe not quite the same, but I understand your point.
I mean,
And
that's
as I
sort of the
say,
libertarians' thing is shtick is enough of the two party system,
correct.
and one guy wins. It's like, how about let's offer like, okay, what do you want to do? Who are we gonna get elected? Like, yeah, libertarians aren't the best at cooperating.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. It seems like a lot of liberty-minded groups don't tend to cooperate very well. I mean,
Yeah,
I've
because
shared
it's not. I mean, you look at the personality profile of libertarians in general; they're not very communal minded.
correct, and I think that's where the downfall really comes. So, for instance, out here in the UK, we do have the Libertarian Party, of which I am a member. And I mean, just being honest, it is a very small party.
Mm-hmm.
So we got divisions in England, Wales, Northern Ireland. There is the Scottish Libertarian Party. So, for instance, when Count Dankula came out from the courtroom with his verdict, there was a big crowd outside that was cheering him on. That was the Scottish Libertarian Party that organized a campaign on free speech and really defended
Oh
him.
shit! They organized something.
Yeah, they did. They did. But I mean, unfortunately, Dankula went and joined UKIP, which is the UK Independence Party. That, in many ways, it's not necessarily libertarian, but it's definitely more in line with like the classical liberal understanding and
Theology.
ideology. Yeah, I was about to say theology, but it's ideology. And it was what were like the classical right wing party about freedom and stuff like that, and they fought for the Brexit campaign, and they're getting a resurgence. So in the beginning, when Count Dankula made his statements about joining UKIP, and I mean he kind of did it in farce. He basically said that the UKIP party is the only party willing to stand up for free speech. And that wasn't true, of course, because the Scottish Party and the Scottish Libertarians and the Libertarian Party both stand up for free speech. And there are a lot of like small parties that do it. So the narrative changed to, well, it's the only major party that stands up for free speech.
It comes down to who's actually going to do something.
Which is what I'm getting to. So
yeah.
UKIP has actually run a campaign. It was run by Nigel Farage. They got the referendum. They were winning seats in the parliament for Brexit, for the referendum. And the Conservatives panicked and basically said, well, if we're elected, we'll give you the referendum, which they did. And that's when UKIP started to kind of, disappear, because Cameron did the referendum. Brexit was the vote. And it's kind of like, okay, well, UKIP has served its purpose. But now, Theresa May and her Chequers plan is not very popular. It's basically Brexit light, and it keeps us within the customs union, and we have to keep all the regulations of Brussels. But we're no longer part of the parliament, so we don't really have any more power or say. So we basically become a vassal state on the issue of trade. So it's a disaster. UKIP has had a resurgence as a result of that. And as you know, Sargon, Paul Joseph Watson, Milo Yiannopoulos, to name a few, have joined the UKIP party. Now, I'm in a lot of these groups. I'm in the liberalist group. I'm in, classical liberal groups and stuff like that. And I'm in there with a bunch of people from the Libertarian Party, many of whom I know very well, good friends of mine and stuff like that. And they're trying to sway a lot of attention to them. Like, well, if you're going to join UKIP, you could join the Libertarians too and stuff like that and whatever. And as much as I understand for, the party line and whatever, even I was like, yeah, if I actually want to get shit done, I probably have to join UKIP as well. Not that I'm going to leave the Libertarian Party, but at least on this front, there's the chance that they might actually do something. They might actually, even if they don't get elected, they could do like what they did with the campaign and maybe push a free speech issue to the point where the ruling party, in order to win an election, has to also push a free speech issue. And it really comes down to what we've been discussing. Like, if you actually want to do stuff, like, I'm very concerned about free speech out here. I'm very concerned about self-defense, government overreach, the crime situation. A lot of things are out here. And it's not the two parties that are in, which is Labour and Conservative, are not doing anything. So I definitely would support UKIP in that sense, to try and shake these two dinosaurs up a little bit.
Right.
But I can't really say that to, like, I can't pass that off as advice to the Libertarian Party, because a lot of them are, purist, and, it's about the principles and the idealists and stuff like that. But then there are those of us who's like, no, we need to get shit done, right? So that's what you see happening. And I mean, it's the same nonsense with the liberalists, right? The liberalists have this purity test going on. This was Sargon's group. He didn't want to use the word libertarian. So he came up with the liberalists. The American liberalist is all libertarian, right? The libertarians have taken over the American liberalist movement, and rightly so. It's definitely in line. But when you try to speak libertarian ideas to the UK liberalists, they shoot it down. And they're all supporting the NHS and a lot of the high taxes and just some very non-liberty minded ideas. And it was so bad, it actually caused a split within the group. And like somebody came in and hijacked the group. There's a lot of petty bullshit that went on because of it. simply because the liberalists couldn't understand that you had to be practical. So they wanted their purity test. You know, they wanted their, these are our principles and this is what we hold to. But they're not getting anything done. And you can only get things done if you're willing to cooperate, you know?
Yeah, that is the issue. Because I guess if you look at sort of the American libertarian movement, you see your Facebook pages. So you have obviously like the typical political party Facebook pages, Facebook groups, and whatever. But then once you get into like when you really see for example, like Being Liberty is like one of the big ones. You have Think Liberty, which is kind of a friend of ours. You know how they tend to, when they organize, things get done.
Correct.
They're actually going to conventions, going to conferences. They're producing content, stuff like that. You don't really see that too prevalent in general.
Right.
That level of cooperation is almost a miracle. Because if you look, I mean, you look at it across the board. You look at how many, the attention that YouTubers are getting in the political sort of commentary sphere. You have your skeptic community.
Right.
They tend to be mostly center left. You have the IDW, the intellectual dark web. That is more of a mixture, but those are, there's some with that. But in terms of cooperation on the level to really get libertarians out there, you're not really seeing it a lot. You see a handful, but it's just not quite there. A lot of things tend to be very small group.
Right.
So, I mean, I'll just state, like, I mean, I know a couple, I know of, who's like a part of Being Liberty, but you don't really see too many of them like all on like the same. They're all kind of doing their own projects.
Yeah.
But you're not really seeing like all of them together. Same goes for kind of with the group of Think Liberty, even Sarcasm and Liberty. There's not really, you don't see the kind of organization that you would see with sort of Republicans or Democrats.
Right.
There's a lot of islands, we'll say that.
Yeah,
so
there's nothing wrong with islands or being a small group of people.
You tend to see that. I mean, I don't know if I'm just trying to tie some things together, but it seems it's only more prevalent among libertarians.
Well, I mean, I would argue that the alt-right is the same thing. I don't think the alt-right has massive amounts of organization. I think they're very fragmented. They're small.
I don't know, man. 4chan.
Well, yeah, they definitely have their weapons. But I mean, honestly, I mean, the alt-right has no power, right? Now, what they offer is a plan, which is, that's why I have a tremendous respect for places like the Mises Institute, Learn Liberty, which is, it's a bunch of university courses available for people in economics and freedom principles and stuff like that. The Ron Paul School, a lot of these institutions that are trying to really answer those questions. Like, if we really reduce the state, how can the free market and enterprise and entrepreneurs, how can they fill the gap and take over those services and stuff like that? So there are some that are working on it. It's not mainstream. Like, Mises is not a mainstream thing. I mean, you and I know about Mises. But I mean, that is probably the only kind of ANCAP think tank in the US.
Yeah.
And they're not popular.
Yeah, I mean, you're not. Think Liberty, Being Libertarian, and those groups, they're really only popular with memes, shirts, and they got content. But you're really seeing the ones that are kind of popular are tended to identify to a very, uh, I guess, a lower common denominator than others.
Right.
The it kind of sucks, really.
Right.
Only to be honest, only the real libertarians are going to go to Mises Institute. We're really wanting to.
Yeah.
I mean,
People
you
who
get what
want
I'm
to
saying. The
understand
ones that are more
Austrian
committed, I shouldn't
economics.
say the real ones. The
Yeah.
committed ones are going to really go for that.
Sure. Sure. It takes effort to educate yourself on matters, that are important. I was like, somebody asked me today, like, why are you reading Plato? Why? Because I'm kind of a history nerd, right? I like to,
Yeah,
learn on these
I
kinds of
mean,
things. This was the foundation of Western civilization. I want to read what he wrote. You're not going
yeah,
to get that all the time, right?
right. I mean, like I said, most libertarians are probably just memeing, spouting off taxation as theft,
Which is fine,
which is fine.
but don't be surprised if some people who want more stray away from that ideology and end up in places like the alt right or even worse, the Republican Party. It happened. Right.
Hold on.
I'm just teasing. I'm just teasing.
Or even worse than that, the Democrats.
Oh my God! No, we don't even talk about those converts. But yeah, if it is that you're just gonna spout off and be a keyboard warrior at the end of the day, um, I mean, yeah, I'm all about freedom and liberty. You do you and stuff like that. But don't be so quick to condemn people who want more than that. Like even for myself here, I went out to a couple marches, for Brexit and the issues of sovereignty in the UK and stuff like that.
In the
Went
Women's
out to a
March.
couple.
Just
What's
kidding.
that?
I was
No,
like,
was that?
Women's March? No.
Yeah, 1 trillion for SJW babes. I hear they're easy. Uh, but no, I've gone out. I've supported the Taxpayers Alliance out here, and they're really exposing a lot of the waste of government spending, and especially in the NHS. I've gone out to support the Brexit campaign. And I mean, yes, all right, it's only marching, maybe. It's not really doing anything. I went out for the free speech events at Speaker's Corner, the Free Tommy Robinson. I couldn't make it to that one, but I would have gone. And yeah, I engage in the debate with a lot of people out here. And I also know when not to debate because some people are really not interested in discussing the point. They just want to sprout their point at you. But yeah, some people want more than that. Some people actually want to get pretty active and affect the community. There are not too many avenues to do that within a libertarian framework, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's all hands off. So
But yeah, I mean, definitely, like I said, this is a thing that I think more libertarians need to be aware of, and just talk about it. We're not perfect, and we're not going to just. Not everyone's just going to stick with it just because it feels. I mean, there was a conversation I had. I was on a live stream where we talked about sort of the edgelords. Talked about so when John McCain passed, there was a lot of memes, and there was plenty of memes from libertarians. There was like I showed you the meme. You had the political spectrum, and you had like the center. It was like
yeah,
feeling bad. John McCain died, and then outside of it was LMAO. John McCain died. Like just all the extremes on the political spectrum are all laughing because John McCain's dead because they
right.
all have their issues with him. You had libertarians that just immediately just unleashed all the memes, all the comments about John McCain, like the day he died or the day after he died. And I was like,
Yeah.
and I looked at that, and and people, there was this whole conversation about edgelords and are we really just gonna do that? I just pointed out like, hey, say what you want to say, drone strikes, not being truthful about his military past, all this stuff. Let's just chill a few days.
Yeah.
Most of the country is watching how the internet is going about it. So, and if we're just going to be just like, everyone else and doing our thing, why would people take us seriously? If
Right.
we're sitting here, it's. I basically was just saying, just be cool a few days, then drop the memes. Like,
Right.
but it just showed, like, I mean, it's like you're kicking someone while you're down, and that edgelord, edgy sort of behavior, as they kind of talked about in the video, with the Asian capitalists, they said, sort of the alt right is kind of like this. It's sort of an extension of our sort of outcast, edgy behavior.
Yeah.
We feel we're kind of like this really small fringe group of people believing in libertarianism. Now we're going to go be even more, more edgy, going to the
Yeah.
alt right. And so I think in the same way, but in a different direction, that edgelord edginess that's kind of ridiculous is the behavior and the attitude towards this topic we're talking about, like
Yeah.
it doesn't exist
Right.
because we're just so edgy and we're just so woke that this doesn't happen. That
Yeah.
there's no such thing as you're not a real libertarian if you went to the alt right at one point.
Yeah.
Or
That's the argument. The no true Scotsman sort of thing.
yeah, when no true
I'm,
Scotsman is getting in there, you're no different.
yeah. Pretty much. I mean, I think Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, he claims that he used to be a libertarian. I'll just leave that there.
And with that message,
The steaming pile of the water buffalo claims he was a libertarian. It's like, all right then. Maybe I got that wrong, but I think it was something along those lines. Or he was a capitalist, or something along those lines. People change.
yeah,
People's
because he's
views
totally not a
change.
capitalist now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's advocating, but I mean, as with all socialists, it's hypocrisy, isn't it?
I saw this picture the other day. It was sort of speaking. I don't know if you've seen it. It was a picture someone drew. Basically, it was there was a guy sort of sitting in like a comfy, kind of like I'm sitting in, sort of like this nice chair, and he's sitting there, got a leg crossed, and he's wearing a Che Guevara T-shirt.
Right.
Kind of signifying it wasn't like blue hair or whatever. It was just like he was white guy wearing the Che Guevara shirt, kind of basically showing like this guy's obviously a communist SJW leftist type. And as he's sitting there, you see he's holding a cup of coffee, and you see the coffee is being poured by a Latin American worker
Right.
with like the donkey and the coffee beans pouring into his cup. His shirt is being sewn on a sleeve by someone in China.
Right.
His
Dang.
chair is being assembled by someone here. His shoes are being made by someone. Basically, it's like it's showing where all his stuff came from.
Yeah.
And he's sitting there, Che Guevara. Like, really? Kind of showing the hypocrisy of the modern day communists.
Yeah, the champagne socialists.
Right. This elitist attitude. But
I mean, what would you suggest then? I mean, for some young guy who's out there, he's listening to your stream, and he feels like he's being drawn towards the alt right. He doesn't want to do it. He's like, no, they're devils, but there's nobody else. What do you say to that young man in that situation?
I would say 10 Hail Marys and 15 Our Fathers. No.
Take some vodka and call me in the morning.
Exactly. I mean, the issue that I've always kind of go back to is just, I mean, this is probably a weird thing. Libertarianism is probably not going to work on any large scale. Like, a libertarian president that's going to get anything done is going to be rare. libertarianism is going to go on, but I think its purpose is not going to be to actually have a libertarian in power, but to bring libertarian more into the mainstream in terms of awareness, education, and just persuading things. So it's it's sort of the small group that's going to project its voice to help, you know, point in a direction, sort of a pointer, not the destination. If the destination is probably not going to be libertarian, sort of libertarian utopia, you know, it's more of to point you in a direction of a more libertarian state.
Right.
So, um, I mean, just to use sort of language you and I would understand before. Libertarianism is sort of like a theology or an ideology to sort of lead people in a proper path, not to actually enact like a place to go to. Like it's going to be a movement, but it has. I think it's important that it remains a movement to help guide sort of the conversation, not as a movement to. I mean, you always want to strive for it. That's probably not going to happen.
Right.
But I think it needs to stay where it is to help guide conversations. I mean, you imagine yourself in a like a party, like let's say that's a dinner party. There's 20 Democrats and there's 20 Republicans. They're all across the spectrum. So you have your like more moderate Republican all the way to your far right. So you have, let's say, it was like a perfect representation of this political spectrum.
Right.
And there's you, the Libertarian. So you're all having conversations. Everyone's mingling, and no one really, and no one is, everyone kind of knows where everyone's standing, but you're having this conversation. Well, what are the odds of that Libertarian really becoming sort of like a real leading guest at this dinner party? Probably not real good. But as he has conversations with all these different people, he starts helping them find some common things, some commonalities, common ideas, starts making a little sense with some people. And as let's say whatever comes out of those conversations, comes out of this party, dictates policy. I'm kind of using an analogy here, but
sure,
because he is making sense to both sides, what is going to come out of there is going to lean towards his ideal. It might not be perfect, but it's just going to help lean towards that. For right now, libertarians are just going to help guide conversation, not actually dominate the conversation yet.
Okay.
And it's just a difficult thing to do. I don't know. I guess you could say it's kind of the purpose of the party right now is to,
spark discussion.
Yeah. You see the logo for the Libertarian Party is sort of, I mean, it depends upon if you look at the porcupine one or you see sort of the torch one, the torch logo
right.
they have. We're supposed to kind of be that beacon to kind of, hey, try to come towards this.
Right.
You want to go to the elephant, you want to go to the donkey, but there's this beacon over here,
Yeah, I like the hedgehog. That's a good one.
But you get what I'm saying. Like we're in such a minority.
Are you saying he should join the party?
Join it, but don't take it super seriously.
I mean, from what I've gathered, it was everything you've just said. There really isn't much that person can do.
Unfortunately, not. I mean, why do you and I stick with it when shit's still not getting done?
Well, I mean, this is I like you. Like my advice, if I was in that same situation and somebody was asking me, there's a young man out there, I would tell him use his voice, right? Whatever capacity he can, speak, right? Talk to people, right? Try to make compelling arguments. Try and convert one person at a time, or try to make sense with one issue at a time. Because, like you rightly said, it's going to be a long time, if ever, that libertarianism is going to actually seek power to affect massive change.
It's not even the right word. Yeah, we're gonna get power, then give it back.
Right, which never in the history of democracy has ever happened. I think we joked about that last time about that's basically the plot of Star Wars, the prequel, where they need to give power to the emperor, right? And when it's done, he's going to give it back. Well, no, that never happens, right? The state never gives back power unless absolutely forced to. So yeah, to that young man or young woman or transgender, queer, whatever, speak. As I say, for every person I know who is involved in the political discussion, we need more speech. We need more voices. There are some loud voices on the alt-right side. I'm not saying what they're saying is right or even wrong. Honestly, I don't know. I don't listen to these people, but there are people out there who need to connect with the ideas that you have. And
right.
Staying silent isn't necessarily the best thing. I'd say get on YouTube, do your podcasts, write articles, do videos, take pictures, make spicy memes, do something, right? At least add your voice to the choir of people who esteem liberty as a tenet to be achieved. And hopefully, as I say, we may not, within our lifetime, Amos, we may not see libertarianism become mainstream, but it's a conversation that must keep happening. We have to keep this conversation going. Because out here in the UK, we've lost pretty much all of it.
Right.
And that's because people are too afraid to speak. It took some very amazing strategy by Nigel Farage to bend the will of the state to give the people a referendum on Brexit, which was amazing. And then to win the referendum was even more amazing when the campaign against it was the government, the media, every Ivy League university, everybody was screaming, the world is ending, and they lost.
Right.
Yeah.
Huh.
And that's because of the people. You need a voice for the people. And right now, the alt-right has a very loud voice. They're getting a lot of attention. They seem big because the media keeps saying that everybody's fucking alt-right and a Nazi and stuff like that. So they're creating that space. The media is creating that space for people like the young man that I spoke about, or young woman, or whoever, to find them and not necessarily find the moderate voices that want to establish these ideals. And that's a shame.
Yeah. Well, that's a good note to end on.
Yeah, it was good, man.
Yeah. So yeah, with that said, yeah, I definitely like to hear different people's thoughts on it. I'm definitely going to bring this up to. I'm going to share this with different people as well, and also see if this conversation can go any further, or at least get other people on other YouTube channels I know of to get them to talk about it. Definitely know plenty of libertarians that could talk about it. Just like I said, it's a difficult conversation, and fortunately, not enough libertarians are talking about it. Because from what I've heard, this has kind of been observed by others. It's not really so much talked about within among libertarians. You see people kind of go, "Hey, there's this libertarian here." And, oh, hey, he's over here now. What's going on with this little group of anarchists? But yeah. Quick little thing. So for the time being, I don't know if for those of us who are following us, I guess we talked about bringing Mackenzie from Sarcasm Liberty on. If you guys follow her on Facebook or Twitter at all, she just announced she's getting married, so she's really busy with that. So we're kind of putting it on hold for the time being. Hopefully we get back to it at some point in the next couple months or so, and we'll see if we can get her on. She's definitely really busy. But I am going to be working on getting the other Sarcasm and Liberty team members onto the stream, talk about their things. There's a couple other guys that are involved with making memes, managing the other social media accounts, and they all have pretty good ideas to talk about as well. But yeah, join us next week. We're going to be set on Monday for now. So Mondays at 11 o'clock Central Time. That'll be the time from now till things change again, maybe. My work, it's pretty much dependent upon my work schedule. Yeah, tune in with us next week at 11 o'clock. As always, like, comment, and subscribe to my channel, as well as go subscribe to Brook's channel. Follow both of us on social media. One more thing. Tonight at 7:30 Central Time, I will be on the Hop of Supremacy YouTube channel talking about we're going to do a live stream talking about the carnivore diet. They need a picture of me. They want some picture of me to put on the thumbnail of the video. So I don't know what I'm going to do. If I'm just going to go get like a steak, like, I don't know, kiss it while I'm taking a picture. I don't know. We're going to talk about the carnivore diet as they are also experimenting with that. They're going to start that today. So check that out over there at Hop of Supremacy. Look them up on YouTube. You'll see the stream tonight at 7:30. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Any last thoughts, Brook?
No. I think you're right. The conversation needs to be had. Thank you for the courage to actually have this conversation. I mean, we're probably going to get a lot of heat from it. But yeah, as I say, I think we need more speech and we need to talk about tough issues. Otherwise, you're just like everybody else. So thanks for watching, everyone.
All right.